Now that's a very interesting statement because I've seen you play live, and your performance, your sound is very different, very powerful, almost as if you're a different band when you're playing in a live setting. Is that because you're getting energy from the audience, or is it a conscious decision to be different on the record than on stage?
Well, I think it's both. I think, like, say, in the studio, maybe on a certain song, like Don't Go, for example, I think I played maybe 5 or 6 guitar parts in that. Because when I get to going on something, if I hear something, I'm not going to limit myself. I just want to do whatever it feels like it needs to happen. When you play it live, I only have one guitar, So it's different. So you have to put a little bit of a different flavor to make it work, It's like on a record, something can really lay back and be kind of mellow, and then when you're playing in front of people, maybe you make it a little more danceable or give it a little bit different feeling so that it's more palatable, in the live setting. I've heard people complain about that too, saying, "Oh, well, I got your record. I loved you guys live. I got your record home, and it's not the same." It's like, well, that's what records. Records are not always the same. Ideally, you have some sort of a budget, like Pink Floyd or somebody, and you make the record, and then you bring like 50 guys to come play the parts.
For me, singing for an audience is completely different than singing in the studio. And I do approach it differently because there's something that happens beyond what I give. When the audience is there and they're showing the love and they're bright-eyed and they're looking at you and they're rooting for you, it makes me sing better. It brings out more. And when I'm sharing such a incredibly passionate tune, with just me in a little bitty space in a studio, it's just not the same as if you're sharing it with people. We are a good band live. I mean, there's a lot of bands that, you get their records and then they cannot pull it off live. And I think that is a strong point of ours, is that we do have the vocals and we do have the musicality, live. If we had a couple more guitar players, it would sound a lot like the record. And we're open to that. We're open to other people coming in. It just doesn't happen.
Call 1-800-100-YEAR-FLOOD. Operator. The studio seems to have grown organically. Were you involved in that process?
Actually, I encouraged John to build the studio because he had actually said, "I want to record a record for 100-Year Flood. Let's do it at this other studio in town." And I was like, to hell with that. Let's just borrow some gear. We know friends that have this. We got some DA-38s, real cheap stuff. We brought it up here and set it up kind of in the corner over here. And basically, we just put the drums upstairs and the amp in the bathroom and, started doing all that stuff. And I ran it. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I think that experience made John realize, he's like, well, I've got the spot to do it. I've got the bands to do it with. I've got the guy who wants to run it. Let's do it.
Do you think that not knowing how to run it actually added to the creativity that was going into producing the music, and also for them,
Absolutely. And the fact that it was built originally as an analog studio with tape. So I learned how to work on tape. I may be the youngest guy that learned how to work on tape. But it definitely affected the way that I handle. I record with Pro Tools now, but I think working with tape affected my awareness of how to capture something. There's so many times now people with digital recording, it's like you just record it. You record the part, then you record it again, record it again, and put it together. When you're working with tape with limited tracks, you don't really do it that way. You do it in the moment. It's like if the vocal performance, if there's a problem, you fix it right then and there, and you get that feeling in the moment, and that's a great technique, and I still use that a lot in the digital realm. We have a saying around here that we use a lot. I think I heard it from Steve Earle or somebody, but it's like making records is sort of like breakfast. The chicken contributes, but the pig commits. And so no matter what technique you're using, no matter who's doing what, the goal, and my goal as a producer, as an engineer, is to always make sure the pig is committing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Giving their all.
Giving their all, no matter what.
Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that if you mix on a soundboard, you can get more depth and dimension, that you can move the sound around more compared to people who mix on a computer using Pro Tools, for example. Do you get a better result with the board?
That has not been my experience. And I think more and more as time goes on, we get used to the sound of digital recordings because everyone's doing it now. I think just a few years ago, we were still kind of listening to a lot of analog and lots of stuff that was being run through the board, and we were like, yeah, you know, that's the sound. But I think as we go, I mean, it's not going to be long. People are going to be making records on their cell phone, you know. And I think we get used to that sort of sound, and it's actually a development. It's sort of like digital distortion, for example. A few years ago, people were saying, oh, digital distortion is horrible. Avoid it at all costs. And now I'm hearing records with digital distortion all over them. And it's kind of pleasing to the ear because I'm getting used to it. And I have to think that back in the analog tape days, you know, in the early days, they were like, don't hit the red because if you do, it starts to crack up, and we don't want that sound. But at some point when rock and roll came along, they realized that a snare drum that spanks the meter sounds really cool.
Right.
Okay, and so then everybody kind of started doing it, and they started getting used to it, and now that's what you do, you know, and it became the sound of tape, that natural tape compression. I think digital is doing the same thing now. It's going through that revolution of like, oh, this doesn't sound cold and digital. It sounds the way music is supposed to sound. And that's been my experience. I'm finding that all the producers that I talk to nowadays, the real producers, are just mixing in the box. I mean, nobody is really running out through stuff anymore. Maybe they are, but not the guys that I know. But maybe you're right. You know, maybe you're right, but you know, we just made a record last summer with Andy Kravitz producing it, and he did it all in the box. And one of the things that I loved about him was that nothing was really sacred or precious. It's like, it sounds good or it doesn't. You know, there's no formula for what I should do or how it should be done or where the mic is supposed to be. It's just like, if it sounds good, it sounds good. If you're using a 57 and it sounds good, then why pull out the Neumann? You know, if it sounds good mixed on the laptop, then why try to bust it through the board, you know?
Is digital recording allowing a new freedom of movement? You know, allowing the recording to be done in places outside the studio environment, almost like field recording, if you will. How is this affecting recording today?
It affects everything. I just returned yesterday from a trip down to Austin. I'm producing a band down there. And I took my own rig. The studio that I worked in is in a way, some of the gear is inadequate. So I was able to take my own stuff down there in the trunk of the car and set up. I actually told the guys, it's like, we don't even have to go to the studio if you don't want. I'll come to your house. We'll do it at your house. I've got some nice mics to bring, preamps, things. We'll just set up in your living room and make a record. You know, I think they got a little, they were like, oh, I don't know, let's go to a studio and do it, you know, which is cool because I love working in a studio. But what's happening is truly a revolution of making records in that you can do phenomenal things in the strangest places now. You know, you could go to some old church somewhere and set up your laptop and make a top-notch record.
Reverb that you can't duplicate.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.